My boss fired me for being too expensive. After 18 years leading engineering, later his panicked calls started to come back. The day my boss called me into his office, I knew something was off. The air felt heavier than usual, and the fluorescent lights above seemed to buzz with an unspoken tension. 18 years, that's how long I had been leading the engineering team at this company. 18 years of solving problems no one else could crack, mentoring young engineers who would later become leaders themselves, and steering projects that transformed our small firm into a recognized name in the industry. But as I walked through the glass doors of his corner office for what I thought was just another routine meeting, little did I know it would mark the beginning of a journey far more complex than anything I'd ever engineered. I sat down across from him, noticing how he avoided making eye contact, instead shuffling papers on his desk like they held some urgent secret. He cleared his throat twice before finally speaking, each word landing like a hammer blow. "We've decided to let you go." My mind raced, trying to process what he meant. Let me go? For what? Had I made a mistake? Failed somewhere? No, this wasn't about performance or results. It never had been. Instead, he offered up the explanation that still stings when I think about it now: "You're too expensive." Too expensive. Those two words echoed in my head as if someone had turned them into a mantra. Too expensive after nearly 2 decades of loyalty, innovation, and leadership. Too expensive despite having built systems and processes that saved the company millions over the years. Too expensive even though I'd taken pay cuts during lean times because I believed in the work we were doing together. As much as I wanted to argue, to remind him of everything I'd contributed, the look on his face told me there was no room for negotiation. This decision had already been made, likely weeks ago, without consulting anyone outside their closed-door meetings. Walking out of that office felt surreal. My heels clicked against the polished floor tiles, but the sound seemed distant, muffled by the weight pressing down on my chest. Colleagues glanced up from their desks, sensing something was wrong but unsure whether to approach me. Some offered tentative smiles, others quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. I forced myself to keep moving forward, step by step, until I reached my own office, the space where countless late nights and early mornings had blurred into triumphs both big and small. Packing my belongings took longer than expected, not because I had so much to gather, but because every item triggered a memory. There was the framed photo of my team celebrating the launch of our flagship product, a moment filled with pride and camaraderie. A stack of handwritten notes from interns thanking me for guidance reminded me of the lives I'd touched along the way. Even the coffee mug stained with years of caffeine rituals felt heavy with significance. Each piece of my professional life fit neatly into a cardboard box, yet none of it could contain the swirl of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. As I carried the box to my car, reality began to sink in deeper. This wasn't just losing a job, it was losing a part of my identity. For 18 years, I hadn't just worked here, I'd lived here, pouring heart and soul into building something meaningful. Now, all of that was being reduced to a line item on someone else's budget spreadsheet. And for what? To save money? To make room for cheaper talent? None of it made sense, not then and certainly not now. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the conversation in my mind, dissecting every word, every pause, searching for answers that weren't there. Why had they done this? Was it really about cost, or was there something else beneath the surface? Questions swirled endlessly, leaving me restless and frustrated. By morning, exhaustion had settled in, but clarity remained elusive. All I knew was that I couldn't stay stuck in anger or self-pity. If they thought getting rid of me was going to erase my value, they were sorely mistaken. Whatever came next, I vowed to face it head-on, and prove them wrong. In the days following my abrupt departure, I found myself grappling with a mix of emotions that felt overwhelming. Anger simmered beneath the surface, fueled by the injustice of being discarded after dedicating nearly 2 decades to the company. How could they dismiss my contributions so callously? Frustration bubbled alongside it, directed not only at my former boss but also at myself, for trusting too deeply, for staying loyal when perhaps I should have sought opportunities elsewhere. Yet, intertwined with these sharp edges of resentment was a profound sadness. It wasn't just the loss of income or stability that weighed on me, it was the severing of ties to people I genuinely cared about, colleagues who had become family over the years. At first, I tried to bury these feelings under a flurry of activity. I updated my resume, polished my LinkedIn profile, and reached out to contacts in the industry. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the emotional toll lingered. Nights were the hardest. Alone in my quiet apartment, I replayed memories of milestone moments, the standing ovations after successful project launches, the laughter-filled team dinners, the heartfelt thank you emails from employees whose careers I had helped shape. These fragments of my past life haunted me, reminding me of all I had lost. What struck me most, though, was the shame. Despite knowing deep down that I had done nothing wrong, there was a nagging voice inside my head whispering that maybe I had. Maybe I hadn't been good enough, efficient enough, adaptable enough. Maybe I had grown complacent in my role, resting on the laurels of past successes instead of proving my worth anew each day. The idea that I might have failed, even inadvertently, gnawed at me, chipping away at my confidence. Still, amidst the storm of negative emotions, there were flickers of defiance. I refused to let this setback define me. Over coffee one morning, a close friend reminded me of something I already knew but needed to hear aloud. They didn't fire your skills or your experience. They fired a number on a balance sheet. Her words resonated deeply, planting a seed of resolve within me. Yes, I was angry, hurt, and confused, but I was also determined. Determined to rebuild, to reinvent, and to show the world, and perhaps even myself, that my value extended far beyond what any employer could quantify. With time, I began channeling those raw emotions into action. I started attending networking events, reconnecting with old acquaintances, and exploring new avenues in the engineering field. I immersed myself in learning about emerging technologies and trends, realizing that while the corporate landscape had shifted, my passion for problem-solving remained as strong as ever. Slowly but surely, I began to see this chapter not as an ending, but as an opportunity, a chance to rediscover who I was outside the confines of that office and to rewrite my story on my own terms. The weeks turned into months, and gradually, life began to take on a new rhythm. I threw myself into freelance consulting gigs, leveraging my expertise to help smaller companies tackle challenges they couldn't solve alone. It was humbling at first, going from leading a large team to working solo, but it also reignited a spark I hadn't realized had dimmed. Without the constraints of corporate bureaucracy, I found freedom in choosing projects that excited me, collaborating directly with clients who valued my input, and seeing immediate results from my efforts. Each success, no matter how small, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Around this time, I reconnected with Sarah, a former colleague who had left the company years earlier. Over coffee, she listened intently as I recounted my journey since the firing, the anger, the self-doubt, and the slow climb back toward confidence. When I finished, she leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, "what happened to you isn't just your story. So many women in tech face similar situations. Maybe it's time you started sharing yours, not just as a way to heal, but to inspire others." Her words stayed with me long after our meeting ended. That evening, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by notebooks and half-empty cups of tea, I opened my laptop and began typing. At first, it was cathartic, a way to process everything I'd been through. But as the words flowed, I realized I wasn't writing solely for myself anymore. I wrote about the highs and lows of leadership, the double standards faced by women in male-dominated industries, and the resilience required to rise above setbacks. I shared anecdotes from my career, blending humor and vulnerability to create something relatable yet empowering. To my surprise, people responded. Former colleagues reached out to say how much my posts resonated with them. Strangers messaged me, thanking me for putting into words what they had struggled to articulate. One woman, a mid-career engineer contemplating leaving her toxic workplace, told me my story gave her the courage to make a change. Reading her message brought tears to my eyes, not because I felt sorry for her, but because I understood the power of connection. In telling my truth, I had unknowingly created a lifeline for others navigating their own storms. As my online presence grew, so did opportunities. I was invited to speak at conferences, moderate panel discussions, and even mentor young engineers eager to learn from someone who had been there. These experiences pushed me further out of my comfort zone, forcing me to confront lingering insecurities while reinforcing my belief in my abilities. With each talk, I became more confident, not just in my technical knowledge, but in my capacity to lead, inspire, and affect change. Yet, amidst this newfound momentum, shadows of doubt occasionally crept back in. There were moments when imposter syndrome whispered that I didn't belong in these spaces, that somehow my accomplishments weren't enough. During one particularly challenging week, I received feedback from a client questioning my approach to a project. Though constructive, Their critique hit harder than it should have, dredging up old fears of inadequacy. But instead of retreating, I leaned into the discomfort. I sought advice from peers, refined my methods, and delivered a solution that exceeded expectations. That experience taught me an invaluable lesson. Growth often comes wrapped in uncertainty, and embracing it is key to moving forward. By the end of the year, I had carved out a niche for myself as both a consultant and advocate for women in STEM. My calendar was full, my network expansive, and my outlook brighter than it had been in months. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this transformation wasn't complete, that somewhere on the horizon lay another chapter waiting to unfold. Little did I know, the universe had plans to test my resilience once again, and force me to confront the very institution that had cast me aside. It started with a single email. The subject line read, "Urgent consultation needed." At first glance, it seemed like any other request from a potential client seeking my expertise. But as I scanned the sender's name, my stomach dropped. It was him, my former boss, the man who had coldly dismissed me as too expensive mere months ago. My finger hovered over the delete button, tempted to erase the message without a second thought. What possible reason could he have for reaching out now? Curiosity, or perhaps stubborn pride, got the better of me, and I clicked open the email. His tone was formal, almost apologetic, though carefully devoid of emotion. He explained that the company was facing a crisis. A major project had gone disastrously off track, jeopardizing not only its timeline but also its financial viability. Key personnel had either quit or been reassigned, leaving behind a skeleton crew ill-equipped to handle the complexity of the task. Desperate for a solution, he admitted they needed someone with my level of experience and insight to salvage what remained. He concluded with a thinly veiled plea, asking if I'd be willing to meet for coffee to discuss the situation further. For a moment, I stared at the screen, incredulous. Did he really think I'd jump at the chance to help the very company that had shown me the door? Part of me wanted to draft a scathing reply, detailing exactly how little interest I had in bailing them out of their self-inflicted mess. Another part, however, couldn't deny the intrigue. What had gone so wrong that they were turning to me, the person they deemed expendable, for salvation? Against my better judgment, I sent a brief response agreeing to meet, fueled by equal parts curiosity and a desire to see firsthand just how dire things had become. The cafe where we arranged to meet was bustling with afternoon chatter, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint hum of conversation. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table, looking far older than I remembered. Stress lines etched his forehead, and his usually immaculate suit appeared rumpled, as though he'd slept in it. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of sympathy, but it vanished the moment he stood to greet me, extending a hand with practiced politeness. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice tinged with desperation. We ordered drinks and settled into awkward small talk before he finally broached the topic at hand. As he spoke, the full extent of the disaster unfolded. The project in question was one I had initially spearheaded years ago, a cornerstone initiative that had earned the company significant recognition. After my departure, leadership had decided to cut costs by outsourcing critical components to less experienced contractors. Predictably, corners were cut, communication broke down, and deadlines slipped uncontrollably. Now, with investors breathing down their necks and competitors circling like vultures, they were teetering on the brink of collapse. He paused, waiting for me to respond, his eyes searching mine for some sign of willingness. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. Inside, a storm of conflicting emotions raged. On one hand, I felt vindicated. They had dismantled everything I'd built, only to realize too late how crucial it had been. On the other, their predicament stirred something deeper, a lingering attachment to the work itself. This project had once been my baby, a source of immense pride and accomplishment. Could I stand by and watch it crumble without lifting a finger? When I finally spoke, my tone was measured, deliberate. "Why me?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "You made it clear when you let me go that I was too expensive. Surely there are others more affordable who can step in." His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw genuine regret flicker across his face. "I won't lie, I made a mistake," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "Cutting costs seemed logical at the time, but it came at a cost we didn't anticipate. You were right about a lot of things, including how indispensable you were." The admission caught me off guard. For years, I had imagined scenarios where he would acknowledge the error of his ways, but hearing it aloud felt surreal. Still, forgiveness wasn't something I was ready to offer, not yet anyway. Instead, I pressed him for details, timelines, budgets, deliverables. The more he revealed, the clearer it became that salvaging the project would require nothing short of a miracle. And yet, the challenge intrigued me. Here was an opportunity not just to prove my worth, but to demonstrate the value of experience and vision in a world increasingly obsessed with cutting corners. By the end of our meeting, I hadn't committed to anything concrete, but I agreed to review the materials they provided and consider my options. Walking away from the cafe, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. Satisfaction because, for the first time since my firing, I held the upper hand. Unease because I knew the road ahead, if I chose to walk it, would be fraught with complications. Helping them wouldn't just mean confronting old wounds, it would require navigating a minefield of fractured relationships, unrealistic expectations, and the ever-present risk of being taken for granted once again. That night, as I sifted through the documents they had sent, I allowed myself to entertain the possibility of taking on the challenge. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point, it was about honoring the work I had poured my heart into and ensuring its legacy endured. But even as I leaned toward saying yes, a nagging question lingered. Could I trust them not to betray me a second time? Over the next few days, I wrestled with the decision, weighing the pros and cons with painstaking precision. Taking on this project meant stepping back into a world that had treated me unfairly, reopening wounds I thought I'd healed. Yet it also presented an unparalleled opportunity to reclaim ownership of something I had built, to restore its integrity, and to leave an indelible mark on an organization that had underestimated me. Ultimately, it was this sense of purpose that tipped the scales. When I informed my former boss of my decision, I did so with clear conditions. First, I insisted on complete autonomy over the project's direction, free from interference by upper management. Second, I demanded a team composed of trusted collaborators, both former colleagues and new hires vetted personally by me. Finally, I set a non-negotiable fee structure, one that reflected not only my expertise but also the urgency and complexity of the task at hand. To his credit, he accepted without hesitation, likely aware that his leverage was minimal. Re-entering the office felt surreal. The familiar scent of industrial carpet cleaner and stale coffee greeted me as I walked through the lobby, but everything else seemed foreign. Faces I once knew intimately now regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Some nodded politely, others avoided eye contact altogether. I reminded myself that this wasn't about them, it was about the work. Still, the weight of their gazes lingered as I navigated the halls toward what had once been my office. The space assigned to me was different, smaller, tucked away in a corner of the building far removed from the executive suites. It was symbolic, I realized, a reflection of how they viewed me now, necessary but peripheral. Yet, rather than dwell on the slight, I focused on transforming the room into a command center. Whiteboards lined the walls, charts detailing timelines and milestones covered every available surface, and laptops buzzed with activity as I assembled my team. Together, we dove headfirst into the chaos, dissecting the tangled web of mismanagement and poor planning that had led to the current crisis. The initial weeks were grueling. Long hours stretched into late nights, fueled by takeout meals and endless pots of coffee. Progress came in fits and starts, hindered by outdated systems, fragmented data, and a pervasive culture of blame-shifting among staff. At times, frustration threatened to derail us entirely. Old habits die hard, and some members of the existing team resisted my methods, clinging to inefficient practices out of fear or stubbornness. But I refused to let setbacks deter me. Drawing on lessons learned during my months of reinvention, I adapted my approach, blending firm leadership with empathetic communication to break down barriers and foster collaboration. One pivotal moment came during a particularly contentious meeting. Tempers flared as department heads argued over who bore responsibility for the project's failures. Voices rose, accusations flew, and the atmosphere grew toxic. Sensing the conversation spiraling out of control, I stepped in, raising my hand to silence the room. "Enough," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the noise. "Pointing fingers won't fix this. What will is accountability, not for what went wrong, but for what happens next. We either move forward together, or we fail separately." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. For a moment, I wondered if I had overstepped, alienating the very people I needed to win over. Then slowly, nods of agreement began to ripple through the group. From that day forward, the dynamic shifted. Collaboration replaced conflict, and incremental victories began to pile up. Deadlines were met, quality improved, and morale, once at rock bottom, began to climb. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting on the irony of the situation. Here I was, pouring my energy into saving a company that had discarded me, proving my worth to people who had doubted it. It was exhausting, infuriating, and oddly fulfilling all at once. Each milestone reached felt like a personal victory, a testament to my resilience and skill. Yet, beneath the surface, questions lingered. Would this redemption arc be enough to mend the fractures between us? Or was I simply playing a role in a narrative destined to repeat itself? Despite the progress, cracks began to form, not in the project itself, but in the foundation of trust one had hoped to rebuild. Subtle signs hinted at underlying tensions, lukewarm responses to my suggestions, delayed approvals for critical resources, and whispered conversations that ceased abruptly whenever I entered a room. At first, I dismissed these moments as paranoia, remnants of old wounds coloring my perception. But as the pattern persisted, denial gave way to suspicion. Something was amiss. The breaking point came during a routine status update with senior leadership. I had prepared meticulously, presenting a detailed report outlining the project's trajectory, risks mitigated, and milestones achieved. The presentation was thorough, backed by data and visual aids designed to leave no room for ambiguity. Yet, as I wrapped up, one executive raised a question that stopped me cold. "How do we know this isn't just smoke and mirrors?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. "You've been here before. How can we trust you won't run into the same issues again?" The implication stung. It wasn't just a challenge to my methods, it was a direct assault on my credibility. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. All the effort, all the late nights spent rebuilding what they had broken, seemed to count for nothing in their eyes. I masked my frustration with professionalism, responding calmly while inwardly seething. But as I returned to my makeshift office, the weight of their doubts settled heavily on my shoulders. That evening, I vented to Sarah, who had become both confidant and sounding board throughout this ordeal. Her reaction was swift and pointed. "This isn't about the project anymore," she said bluntly. "They're scared of you. Of your competence, your independence, the fact that you're succeeding where they failed. They don't want to admit they need you, you scare them." Her words struck a nerve, forcing me to confront an uncomfortable truth. My presence here wasn't just a means to an end, it was a disruption to the status quo. By excelling where others faltered, I had inadvertently highlighted their inadequacies, shaking the fragile egos of those in power. And now, rather than embrace the changes I brought, they were finding ways to undermine me, subtly, insidiously, but unmistakably. Determined not to let their insecurities derail the progress we had made, I doubled down on transparency. I scheduled weekly check-ins with key stakeholders, providing real-time updates and soliciting feedback to ensure alignment. I documented every decision, every success, and every challenge, creating an unassailable record of accountability. Yet, despite these measures, the resistance continued, manifesting in passive-aggressive remarks and deliberate delays in approving essential steps. One particularly frustrating incident involved a crucial vendor contract. After weeks of negotiations, I secured terms that would significantly reduce costs while maintaining quality, a win-win scenario. But when I submitted the agreement for final approval, it languished on someone's desk for days, held hostage by bureaucratic red tape. When I confronted the responsible party, their excuse was flimsy at best, just dotting the I's and crossing the T's. The subtext was clear: they were stalling, hoping to find fault where none existed. These obstacles tested my patience and resolve, but they also reinforced my determination. If they thought dragging their feet would force me to compromise or retreat, they were sorely mistaken. Instead, I used their tactics as fuel, channeling my frustration into laser-focused execution. Every delay became an opportunity to refine processes, every critique, a chance to strengthen solutions. Slowly but surely, I began to dismantle their attempts to sabotage the project, not through confrontation, but through sheer excellence. But even as I gained ground, a nagging question lingered: how much longer could I sustain this balancing act? Proving my worth was one thing, enduring constant scrutiny and sabotage quite another. The finish line loomed closer with each passing day, yet the path to get there felt increasingly treacherous. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the greatest challenge still lay ahead, one that would force me to choose between walking away entirely or claiming a place I never intended to fight for. As the project neared completion, the atmosphere within the company shifted in subtle yet undeniable ways. Success, it seemed, was a double-edged sword. On one hand, our achievements were impossible to ignore. Milestones were met, budgets adhered to, and deliverables exceeded expectations. Investors who had once expressed doubts now praised the turnaround, crediting the renewed focus and strategic overhaul for stabilizing the initiative. Publicly, accolades flowed freely, and my contributions were acknowledged, if begrudgingly, at executive meetings. Privately, however, the undercurrent of tension remained. My presence continued to unsettle those who preferred the comfort of mediocrity to the challenge of excellence. It became increasingly apparent that my role in the company's recovery posed a threat to the established hierarchy. While I had proven my worth beyond measure, my success also illuminated the shortcomings of those around me. Executives who had presided over the project's decline now found themselves overshadowed by someone they had dismissed as expendable. Their discomfort manifested in petty grievances, nitpicking minor details, questioning decisions that had already yielded positive outcomes, and subtly diminishing my contributions in front of stakeholders. Yet, despite their efforts to undermine me, I refused to engage in their games. Instead, I focused on completing the project with the same precision and dedication that had defined every step of the journey. The culmination of our work arrived sooner than expected, thanks in part to my relentless drive and the unwavering commitment of my team. The final presentation to the board of directors was a masterclass in execution. Charts, graphs, and testimonials painted a vivid picture of transformation, showcasing not only the project's revival but also the systemic improvements implemented along the way. As I wrapped up the presentation, I allowed myself a brief moment of pride. This was more than a successful outcome, it was validation of everything I had fought for since my firing. The applause that followed was polite but restrained, a reflection of the ambivalence still lingering in the room. Still, I knew the numbers spoke louder than any tepid clapping ever could. Afterward, my former boss approached me, his demeanor markedly different from the panicked figure who had begged for my help months earlier. Gone was the desperation, in its place was a calculated calm. "You've done remarkable work," he said, his tone measured. "But now that the project is wrapping up, we need to discuss next steps." I braced myself, sensing what was coming. Next steps likely meant severance, again. This time, however, I wasn't blindsided. I had anticipated this moment, preparing for it long before it arrived. "Before we talk about that," I replied evenly, "I think it's important to address something. You brought me back because you needed me. I delivered. But I'm not here to be used and discarded again." His expression faltered slightly, caught off guard by my bluntness. "That's not what this is about," he insisted, though his lack of conviction betrayed him. "We're grateful for everything you've done, but the company has to consider its long-term needs." "Grateful?" I echoed, unable to suppress a bitter laugh. "Is that why you question my methods at every turn? Is that why approvals took twice as long as they should have? Don't insult me by pretending this is about gratitude." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, visibly struggling to find the right words. For the first time, I saw him not as my adversary but as a man trapped by his own contradictions. He had called me back out of necessity, yet his ingrained biases prevented him from fully embracing the solution I represented. It was a paradox that would always define our relationship, and one I was no longer willing to tolerate. Before he could recover, I continued. "I'll make this simple. I'm not interested in staying in a place where my value is constantly questioned, no matter how much I achieve. If you want to discuss transitioning responsibilities or ensuring the project's sustainability, fine. But don't waste my time pretending this is anything other than what it is." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in stunned silence. The weight of unresolved emotions still lingered, but for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. This chapter of my life had served its purpose. It had tested my limits, reaffirmed my strengths, and clarified the kind of environment in which I belonged. And while the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: I would never allow myself to be diminished again.